My name's DeFelippi. I am a freelance web developer. I do pretty much everything, but lately I've been focusing on front-end development. Historically, I've done a lot of PHP work in the past. I've written back-end frameworks and done all kinds of stuff. So what I'm talking about today is web performance and what it is, and give you kind of like a quick high-level overview. I also co-host the Austin Web Performance Meetup. We're looking for speakers, so if anybody wants to talk about web performance, I'd like to talk to you afterwards. So again, this is going to be a really quick overview, and like I said, I have more slides than minutes, so it's going to be fast. Pretty much almost every slide could be its own topic, its own presentation. So I understand that this is going to be not very in-depth, and you're going to hear some great stuff from the other two speakers. So they're going to go a lot more into the back-end stuff and the technical stuff. So I'm not going to show you any code, but hopefully you'll get something out of it. I do have a quick question here. Like, how many of you are aware of like web performance tools and web performance testing and that kind of stuff? Okay, so maybe 50%, maybe 60%. All right, so that's pretty good. All right, so I won't try to skip anything. If I go too quickly through something, just feel free to ask questions. But we'll get this going. What I'm going to talk about here, and these are not individual things, these are kind of all mixed together, but I'm going to say why you should care, give you some basic metrics, why the business guy should care about this and your boss should care. Sometimes it's hard to convince the people in charge that they should care about web performance. What you can do to improve your performance, how to do it, and I'm going to touch on some tools at the end. It just isn't enough time to go through them too much in depth though. So what we'll not discuss is making your app work. I mean, this is kind of a fundamental thing, right? So your app should work primarily before you really dig deep into the performance. You can keep it in mind while you're developing it, but don't over-optimize early. Security, obviously that's something you should be thinking about anyway. And reliability, I'm going to touch on a little bit, but your site should be reliable. And obviously that has an impact on performance. But that's just a topic unto itself. So why worry, right? Why worry about your web performance? Because it really has a huge impact on your users. So this is a chart. It's actually a little outdated because the latest info is from 2009. But the red bar here is the longest amount of time a user will wait before they either become frustrated or abandon your site entirely. And you can see that this has gone down over time. So 2003, 8 to 10 seconds, 2004, 5 to 8 seconds, and then 2009, 4 to 6 seconds. And actually, also in 2009, some more research was done that says you will lose about a third of your visitors if they start waiting for more than 4 seconds, which is a significant portion of your traffic, especially if you're trying to sell something. And 4 seconds is not much time, when you count it. So this is a real impact on your bottom line. So it shouldn't be very hard to convince the business guys that this really means money. And this also kind of tails into something else. And I didn't really mention it here, but this is about seeing a white page for 4 seconds. Meaning they don't see any content loading, and it looks like nothing's happening. So there's two things you have to think about: actual performance and perceived performance. And really, to the user, they don't care about actual performance. It's all about perception. If users think your app is fast, if they see something quickly and they can like actually start reading or doing or interacting or something, they will not actually know about the actual performance. And this is something you see on sites like Facebook, where they start shooting HTML to you as quickly as possible, and then they start loading the actual JavaScript and stuff later on. So you actually can't interact with that page immediately when you see it. But generally, you can interact with it by the time you're actually trying to interact with it. So blank pages are bad. Show them something as quickly as possible. And again, that's a talk unto itself. So what to do? First, you need to determine where your problems are, right? You need to profile your site. You need to say, like, is this a front-end issue or a back-end issue? And I'm going to touch on both, just to give you like an overview of both. I'm not going to go too in-depth in the back end, just because I know the other two talks are going to do that. But I will touch on some important points, especially related to PHP. So your back end, and this is an actual graph from one of my clients. This was actually a WordPress site. They were seeing the response time was almost a full second. So this is a really simple metric that's easy to see if there's a performance problem in your back end. The site response time, if it's taking a second to respond, you clearly have a problem in the back end. You want that as low as possible. So, and then you can clearly see, like, after we did some plugins and some performance tuning, it went down to under half a second. Still not as fast as I'd like to see it, but as fast as we're going to get it on hosting later on. And WP Engine would probably be better than this. So PHP, what can you do to help improve your performance of your PHP code? And again, I'm not going to talk specific code stuff here, because that's a whole other topic, and I just don't have time. But things like, how are you executing your PHP code? Are you using mod PHP, FastCGI, PHP FPM? These are the modules that your web server uses to interface with PHP and execute your code. And this can have a significant impact on your performance. Now, if you generally use typical Apache installation, or you're using shared hosting or something somebody else set up for you, it's most likely mod PHP. It's the easiest to set up nowadays. Its performance is quite good for most sites. Generally, it's probably what you're going to want to use, just because it's so maintenance-free and it's so easy to just do. It's already configured, auto-configured. FastCGI, just don't do it. PHP FPM is a much better option nowadays. And just the plain vanilla FastCGI has security issues, which you may have seen recently. And very few people actually use just regular FastCGI. So really it's mod PHP versus PHP FPM. Again, not enough time to go in depth here. PHP FPM is great. It kind of integrates the performance that you get from FastCGI with some of the features you get with mod PHP, which I'm going to mention in a moment. And it's really going to be the future, I think. But it does take more effort to configure it and make sure it works well. Trust me, I spent a week on one of my clients' sites, especially if you have hosts that are not so great. APC and some sort of opcode caching. This is really important, and this kind of comes down to like a fundamental way of the way PHP runs. So if you're not already aware of this, this may be something that all of you are aware of. Regular PHP web server is going to be stateless, so every time you execute your code, it is recompiling, re-executing, and re-evaluating that code. And that is slow, that's really slow. So you really need some sort of opcode caching or bytecode caching, which is going to take that compiled code and save it and then reuse it. APC is pretty much the standard now. It's pretty straightforward to set up. There's certainly some settings you can tweak on it. But, I mean, you're going to see like 10x, 20x performance improvements on your back end. You can easily see that. So definitely run something. Of course, if you're on shared hosting, they're not going to be running that. So you're going to take a big performance hit there. And if you're running FastCGI, it's an absolute nightmare to try to get APC to work. So you're probably also not running it there.
Can you say accelerator?
What's that?
E-accelerator.
E-accelerator is another one, sure, absolutely. That's APC is in, I think, core now with 5.3, so that's kind of become the standard. But E-accelerator is still an option there. And then caching everywhere. I mean, APC is a form of caching. It also provides data caching beyond that, which is an okay way of doing it if you're on a single server, but it's not going to share your cache data cross-server like Memcache will. I'm not going to touch too much on that. I believe Rob will talk about that a little bit, about Drupal maybe. Yeah, so obviously anything you can avoid reloading data or reparsing data. So again, not going to touch too much more in there. And obviously server and hosting issues. Ideally, you go with a fast performant host like WP Engine. You won't go with shared hosting, but I'll understand that not every site doesn't make sense for everybody, and it's $5 a month can certainly make sense for some basic sites. I personally run some sites on shared hosting that I don't particularly care about the performance for. Your database, this is far too deep to talk about tonight. There's just not enough time, but clearly check your indices if you're seeing problems in your database. That's a real simple, easy one. People tend to forget to add indexes. Optimize your queries. Again, I'm not going to go deep into this stuff. Optimize your settings. MySQL out of the box just is not optimized whatsoever. Even if you load the big config, I mean that's considered big for like 10 years ago. So it's not a modern config whatsoever. And this again is a whole other topic. You could spend days reading up on it, or you could hire somebody to do it. A DBA that could probably set it up for you in an hour or something. Separate your code from your database. That's a whole can of worms that I'm not going to go into too deeply, but if you have a whole bunch of stored procedures, you're probably going to have bottlenecks there. You're probably putting code in your database you probably should pull out and do elsewhere. Separate your application layer from your data storage layer. Avoid joins if possible, because joins obviously slow down your queries. Obviously another big topic. And use the proper database for your needs. I'm already down to 5 minutes, so I'm going to just skip the rest of that. So front end. So again, this is another client. This is just a tool that I'm going to briefly mention at the end that kind of monitors daily your site and kind of gives you a rating, so you can see obviously as you optimize the site that performance goes up. Generally, you can say the performance follows the 80-20 rule. 80% of the performance problems generally come in the front end and 20% in the back end. Obviously, this is not true for every site, but the browser takes a long time to parse data, to load data, to communicate with your server. And if your backend is loading in a very reasonable amount of time, which it most often is, you're going to see all the bottlenecks in the front end. So one of the key things here is to reduce, right? So reduce your requests. You want to have fewer requests to the server. So that means concatenating or combining your CSS files into a single file, your JavaScript into a single file. Use Keep Alive. This is a real big one. And this is an Apache setting you can use. Keep your connection open. So every time you initiate a connection, if you're not using Keep Alive, you have to reinitiate a TCP/IP connection, and that has high overhead, especially on mobile devices or high latency environments. Sprites, merging your images together into a single image, and eliminating redirects. So stop those 301s and 302s. Just if you can avoid them, it takes up more time. Fewer bytes, gzip your requests. You want to compress everything at the server end. This is another big one. This can really improve the amount of time it takes to load all your data. Minify your files, cut out all the comments and white space and things like that in your JavaScript and CSS. And there are processors that will do this automatically for you. Compress and optimize your images, so PNGs especially. There are tools that can optimize those. Reuse content. Cache static files, add expires headers, and again another topic that I don't have time to discuss, but anything that's static should be cached, so every time the person loads your site, it's saved in their cache. Invalidate by changing the file name of some sort. I could again talk about why and how to do that, but not enough time. And use a CDN because they're going to be faster. Quick touch on tools. Web page test is a great tool, webpagetest.org. Write it down if you don't already know about it. You can just plug in your website and it'll give you some great tips and show you waterfall charts and some other things. Web Inspector has a profiler. Firebug similarly. You can profile your front-end JavaScript if you're having problems there. There's monitoring and metrics tools. Pingdom, just uptime monitoring, but that's that graph I showed with the response time. New Relic is a performance monitoring. You can actually put a PHP plugin in there and actually profile your PHP code. Yoda, which was that other graph. Catchpoint, there's tons of other ones. And I don't have time for questions. But if you have questions after the other two talks, feel free to talk to me. Thanks.